You're listening in on an animated discussion about Harley Quinn on DC Universe with three experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
I'm Sara Century, media critic and writer.
And I'm Avishai Weinberger, screenwriter.
And today we'll be covering episodes 7 through 9. Okay, so we were talking a little bit off mic about how we may have a little bit less to say about these three episodes than we have on the last couple of batches, because it does seem like the plot is ramping up. The character stuff is pretty firmly in place. The trajectories are drawn, and now we're going to deal with some plot stuff.
I guess we'll see.
So I know that you guys already agree with me about that, because like I said, we were talking about it on mic, but tell me, how do you feel about that as a shift in the show? I mean, I think we really came here for all that character stuff. How are we enjoying it now that the character stuff is maybe being turned down a couple notches and the plot is turned up a couple notches? Let's start with Sara. Sara, how do you feel about this?
Yeah, I don't know. I was kind of just enjoying the episodes in a way. I think that they did some stuff that made everything kind of click a little bit better. There was more of a chain, I guess, of events that made more sense to me. Everything kind of, I don't know, it was just really enjoyable. I was able to kind of just kick back and watch them.
Yeah, I agree with that. We may need to come back and kind of camp on what we think changed, or if it is just the fact that they've done all the work and are now doing, the plot stuff, if that's what it was. But I agree, with the exception of one subplot for myself that kind of fell absolutely flat. We'll get to it. Yeah, they were just like, and here we are. Like you're accustomed to the hot bath at this point. Avishai, are you having similar feelings?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, we're in the second half of the show now, and we're ramping up towards a finale. So I feel like we're getting pieces in place now. We're working on getting the characters to a point where they can actually address their various arcs and their flaws and whatnot. So it's all kind of moving away from the sort of a heist of the week story to kind of what the end game is. And as for what you said about we might not have as much to talk about this time. Let's see how that holds up. Let's see how that ages by the end of this episode, because I feel like some stuff is going to sneak up on us.
You're probably right. I'm almost universally wrong whenever I say that at the beginning of podcasts. Every now and then I'm right, and it's an unexpected surprise. So you're probably onto something. Well, let's jump in here then and see about the Queen of Fables. So, Sara, I know you loved her as a tax code, and you were excited when Avishai and I assured you that she would be around more. But here she is, out of the book.
Yeah, I just didn't expect it, I guess, to go the direction that it did, and that's sometimes really great. I thought that it was pretty fun to see somebody actually being a villain in this show. Kind of establishing that there is a line that Harley doesn't really cross, I guess, was important, because there's, in the comics, sometimes she does cross those lines and it's kind of harder to justify her behavior. But in this, it kind of clarified a lot for, I think, what her morality is. And for the Queen of Fables, it was just nice to see her come back and be just absolutely ruthless. That's not really something you see that often, I guess, in these days where we're kind of like, heroes and villains. There's more of a gray area between them and stuff. And I think that overall is really good, but sometimes it is nice to just kind of see somebody go off, I guess. So I enjoyed it. I thought that she was a really good villain, because she's a villain to the villains. That's so good.
Yeah, absolutely. That it really does. Now, I have a lot of thoughts, so that may be the place where it gets longer. We can talk about it, but I have a lot of thoughts about what being a villain to the villains means for us as viewers. Like the more I ponder it, the more I want to think about it. Anyway, I have thoughts about what this means for Harley and all. Ivy, of course, specifically says, I'm not a supervillain unless you count saving plants, and I'm like, well, the murders and the terrorism too, but sure. Queen of Fables even freaks her out. And we literally had a reference to her melting someone's head in pesticide like 2 episodes ago. So pretty fascinating. Avishai, how do you feel about this Queen of Fables?
You always end the what? The bloodline. I love Queen of Fables, and I think she serves a really interesting function in the story because, one of the big questions that Harley's been tackling this season is, how do I become a valid supervillain on my own? How do I get that kind of validation from the Legion of Doom, and what kind of record do I need? And here the question is raised about, like, well, does being a villain necessitate being ruthless? And is that a line she will have to cross if she wants to be taken seriously? And I like that she actually has to think about that, and that by the end of the episode, it almost looks like she's willing to cross that line, but then ultimately isn't. Fables, I think it's a really interesting foil for Harley. And also she's just a lot of fun. I mean, we know that we know there's something up with her the moment that she conjures Humpty Dumpty for a kind of overly excited King Shark and just murders him and just makes scrambled eggs out of his skull, and it just all smiles about it. And I love that character. I love people who are just like gleefully evil, but not necessarily, splitting hairs here, but not necessarily dickish. Like, she's not being manipulative or abusive in a jokery way. She's being very honest about herself. She's like, listen, I'm a villain. I wipe out entire families. That's just a thing about me, and you're gonna either accept that or not. And if you don't accept that, I might kill you. Is that cool? I don't care if that's cool. That's just how it is. And I appreciate there being a character like that who, a supervillain who isn't necessarily opposed to Harley because she doesn't think Harley is, like, capable, and also not a villain who is supportive of Harley because she wants Harley to do well. She's just a villain. She's just going to do whatever she feels.
Yeah. She likes Harley. That's fine. If Harley wants to be in the Queen of Fables club, great. But if not, I may have to kill you. You're right. Like, that's the deal. I will say, I feel like I'm a bad guy, not a bad person, is an excellent thematic statement that I wonder, I don't know, we didn't really need it earlier than this, but I also feel like it's an interesting thematic statement for Harley as a whole. Because one thing that discovering Harley has a line she won't cross, one thing that discovery made me think is, did she have a line she wouldn't cross when she was with the Joker? Because Joker crosses all the lines, and she was there.
That was something I wondered.
In the comics, no.
In the comics, no. She
definitely she kills children at a certain point with explosive video games. So, it's pretty Queen of Fables-esque, I'd say.
Yeah, comic book Harley is very much like I don't want to say the Joker, but female, because that's not exactly what I mean. But I mean, she is willing to do basically most of the same stuff that Joker's willing to do. She just doesn't care about Batman as much.
It's a little bit different now, obviously. She's had her heroic arc, but there was definitely that New 52 edgelord time period where everything had to be like the most extreme. So she like takes Joker's severed face and puts it on Deadshot and like all of this ridiculous stuff where you're just like, I guess you guys. As a
sidebar, the skepticism that the modern DC universe has for itself in terms of the New 52 just justifies every misgiving I had at the time.
Oh, man.
I hated every single bit of it almost.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was rough.
What a time it was. And I was just, as a marketing professional, as a creative, I just looked at it and was like, but how did you guys get to this, though?
It was really funny to read, I think, because everything was so ridiculously bleak, Supergirl had a terrible attitude problem. Supergirl, like all of the characters that you normally are like, oh, that's a really nice person, were just like doing terrible things kind of, or being just deeply unlikable.
Well, it's all Dr. Manhattan's fault.
It was not great, but...
It's all Dr. Manhattan's fault.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. It's all Rorschach Rorschach and Dr. Manhattan up in DC these days, that's for sure.
Apparently, yeah, that's a whole other, it's just, let's just say I find it fascinating that the actual executives who made the new 52 decisions are now using the stories to cast shade on their own creative decisions. It's amazing. Yeah. But I wonder if that shift in time and approach is part of why we have to make this delineation for Harley in this show. Like, they clearly want us to side with Harley, even though she's a villain. And I do appreciate that they've done that without making the heroes equally villainous. You know, like they haven't gone the boys route.
Yeah.
Which would be bad with, I don't love that a lot, but I would especially not love that with these kind of iconic heroic characters. But they still want us to be able to identify with her, and drawing that line is really interesting. But it does make me wonder if this version of Harley drew a line when she was with Joker. And if she didn't, is that supposed to be part of the difference between how she was when she was with the Joker and how she is now?
The whole thing is just about her arc, right? So it's her going from that place all the way to this place, kind of. So even if she did cross those lines, I think that that's not really the point that they're trying to make.
Sure.
But I'm sure that we'll see maybe a little bit more of that in season 2.
There is this moment a couple episodes ago, in the Jim Gordon episode, where she takes over the police precinct, and there's a woman on the phone saying that she's being stalked by a murderer who's still in the house, and Harley just hangs up on her. So like she's willing to let people die. I think she might just be a little squeamish about doing it herself.
Which casts some questions on the line, right? Which we're close watching a cartoon. So it is not, I want to say it's not out of bounds for me to wonder about this, but I also recognize that it kind of is out of bounds since it's clearly not what the show wants to do. It's a little bit like, and this is a little bit of a transition, but also it's tied into this, I think. It's a little bit like our misgivings about Psycho, I think, where they do these toss-off lines or gags and don't really want to look at them that closely. They want us to find him like their lovable sexist uncle, that rascal. And I think the episode with Queen of Fables actually softens Psycho more because even he's horrified by what the Queen of Fables does.
Yeah, Psycho was kind of likable in these episodes, which was really disturbing to me.
I knew for a fact you would be having some squeamish trouble with that, where I was like, Sarah's going to laugh and she's going to wonder if she should, you know?
Oh, yeah. It was interesting to see him, I guess, kind of have that turnaround of being sort of the voice of reason in some of these situations.
Yeah.
I was like, what's happening?
He still kind of gets like knocked around a lot. Like there's that moment where in the Legion of Doom 80s style like introduction video, he's in the background, he whispers something to Black Manta and just gets like tossed into a wall. And when they ask him, what did you say to Black Manta to anger him so much, he says, nothing. Racist. Like, that's as far as they're really willing to go with him at this point. And
right.
You know, it's like, listen, we're aware that we have these problems. I don't even know how aware they are, but it's like, he has these problems. We don't really want to tell stories about that right now, so we don't want to tempt that in a way.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of female screenwriters, so I'm sure that would be difficult to write, or you'd get tired of it pretty fast, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not that I want it to be about that. It's just that they force us to wonder with a couple of these toss-off lines. And that's kind of how I feel about Harley as a bad guy, but not a bad person, where I'm just like,
right.
You bring it up a little bit and you don't exactly put it back to bed, but you also don't force me to think about it that hard. You force me to think about it a little bit, though.
Right. On my podcast, we talked about differences between characters like Deadpool and the Joker. And essentially, it's just that you know the people that the Joker is hurting and you don't know the people who Deadpool's hurting.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we don't have a face for anybody that Harley hurts for the most part. Anybody who she would have hurt in her past, right? So we're like, oh, haha, that's so funny. And then if we actually like saw it, we'd be like horrified.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to apply a sort of moral code uniformly to all these different shows because they all want something different from us. And that,
true.
And so like I'm generally totally happy to have Harley as our hero, who also like rips off heads and maims improv troops and whatnot. It's the second the show itself starts to create tiers of morality. It's like, here's what's okay and here's what's not. You do start to wonder, well, have we always been on this tram line, or have we kind of been jumping tracks a few times here? And so it's interesting, but I think it works in this episode because Fables is so unambiguously extra evil. Like she doesn't just almost destroy Gotham that time. She wipes out an entire family at a picnic in a very gory way. Like she sets the three little pigs to eat the bones. You know, it's like they don't just make her like murderous, they make her grossly murderous and gleefully murderous. And I think that we're always going to kind of ping that as like, okay, if there is a line, wherever that line is, she's definitely crossed it. Jason Praxis. I love...
We hardly knew ye, and it was fine.
I love Jason Praxis. You know? Voiced by Phil Lamar, who I will have you know is a lovely human being.
I assumed so, honestly. What I have never had personal interaction, but whenever I've seen him, you know, being Phil Lamar instead of one of the characters that I enjoy, he seems like a good dude.
And here he's playing another Lightning character.
So he is. Interesting.
Just had to note that.
So let's talk a little bit about the Ivy and Kite Man subplot in this episode. It's very funny. I spend some time feeling bad for Kite Man of all things, which I try not to do on the regular. But I'm going to go right to you, Sarah, because again, you're watching these as we go. You haven't seen this 3 or 4 times like I know I have, and I think Avishai's seen it at least a couple times. You're going through as we go, and you have a very acute concern, you know, about Harley and Ivy as a couple. So how are you finding the Kite Man and Ivy stuff? Is it amusing to you at all, or are you kind of like, can we just get past this? What's it doing for you?
I hate Kite Man. I don't want to. I just do. There's the funny, useless guy trope. I can't. I hate it so much. But, you know, it's fine. And I get why she does it, you know? Like, that's kind of the most important thing is, does it read organic? And it totally does. She is doing all of these over-the-top things for Harley's health, right? Mm-hmm. And Harley seems to not even notice that she's doing them. So, of course, she's going to go get a side piece and, like, try to get over it, you know?
Yeah,
it all makes sense. And he's super into her. He's nice to her, you know? He sucks, but he's nice to her. And that's kind of the most important thing. So, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I was so frustrated by the idea of this. And just whenever I believe I even posted on Twitter or something about how much I just like want this guy to not be a character because he's so frustrating to me. But in this, I think that he is a character that makes a lot of sense, you know? Mm-hmm. I mean, I definitely know Kite Man. I've met many Kite Mans in my life. So it's a lot of realism. I don't know. And it makes sense. Like I said, he's really nice to Ivy. So that's kind of what I have to focus on the most. And the fact that Harley isn't that good to Ivy in this cartoon yet at all.
That's true. Yeah.
The Ivy-Harley relationship that I think is the best is whenever we look at maybe Bombshells, they had a really good relationship in that. And also the Amanda Connor, Jimmy Palmiotti run, that was also really good. And both of those were contingent on Ivy's career taking precedence in Ivy's life. And then also Harley just being kind of completely over the moon for her, you know? So you can only have that basically, because otherwise you're like, why are you bothering with Harley? She's such an asshole to you. So I think that they've achieved it a few times in the Injustice universe. I think that, I mean, they got married. They have a really good relationship there. But it's just kind of, if Harley's going to be like this, then of course she shouldn't be dating Ivy, you know?
That's true. No, look, my frustration with Ivy and Kite Man has nothing to do with Harley at this particular time is ready for a good relationship with Ivy. She's pretty obviously not. So
Right.
yeah, I'm with you. And it is, you bring up a really interesting point that I hadn't thought hard about, which is the idea that Ivy is being not validated, but focused on, like really, Kite Man really likes her. He really likes her. And he's really obvious in liking her. There's no pretense about it with him.
Right. He's not a macho jack either. That's kind of part of the thing that she hates so much about the Legion of Doom, right? She encounters them and is just completely infuriated by all of them. And so I think that there's something to be said there where she's like, this guy at least doesn't think that about himself. You know, this guy at least is in a different realm. He's unthreatening, of course, but also that can be good because she's used to dealing with like Lex Luthor being a complete jack to her. So I don't know. I was like, I don't love it, but I don't at all hate it.
I get it. And Kite Man's not, you're right, he's not threatening. He is a bro, you know, which I think is honestly a little exhausting to Ivy, but also kind of endearing because she shows up with the real 9, you know, at the, you know, that kind of thing where she was like, I know that you think this is funny, so okay, you know.
Right.
Yeah, it's very... Okay, yeah. You're actually taking some of the sting out for me a little bit.
I can't take it for more than a season, you know, like if we meet back up second season and I'm just like, oh my God, like
why is he still here?
I can't keep looking at Kite Man's face. Then, I mean, I'll have earned it.
I have a suspicion that we will feel very badly for Kite Man very briefly towards the beginning of season 2, right? Like when it becomes clear that Ivy and Harley are a thing and he's like, oh, I guess that's it for us. And we're all going to be heartbroken for him. And then we're also going to be glad that we're no longer looking at him.
No way. I'm not going to be heartbroken because this is somebody who already was aiming out of his league. And also it's just the fact
that... A fair cop.
He just... he'll be with somebody else. It doesn't matter, you know, for somebody like Kite Man. He can just move on to the next person who's probably going to be a lot better suited for him and more accepting of him, you know?
Okay. That's an optimistic take for Kite Man because I feel like probably there's not a lot of other ladies in his life. I don't know.
I think that he'll immediately hook up with somebody who's just really nice and goofy like he is, you know?
Oh, that would be great. Now I'm going to think too hard about which Batman villain, like which member of which B to C to D list member of the Rogues Gallery would be great. Like Kite Man and Magpie, you know, something. Magpie's not nice to anybody, so that's a bad example, but you get it.
That would still be really funny. I would totally
be really
take
funny.
That.
I say Weather Witch because she could be the wind beneath his wings.
Oh.
She could really help him be great.
So I kind of like Kite Man because of how difficult he makes it for her, but also because of how much she does. Like, they do put in the work to make sure that we understand why Ivy finds him endearing. It's like, sure, he's going to be sitcom-ish in the sense that he's going to make this relationship incredibly difficult, and we all know that it's not going to work out, and it's really a temporary thing. To the point, you know, throughout the episode, every time he does something endearing, and she's like, you know, like, oh, that's actually really nice. And then he says something to kind of mess it up. She's like, oh, you're making this so hard. But you do get what he offers. Like, he's too often on shows that have this type of character, they don't really do enough work to explain why, like, what are we supposed to see in him? What is anybody supposed to see in him?
Yes.
And here, we get it because, like, he is, like, super confident in a really bro-y way, which is super obnoxious. But he also doesn't necessarily have an insecure ego. Like, he's not really compensating for anything as far as I can tell. He just sort of is this way, and he's willing to settle. Like, his bar isn't super high. He has kind of lower expectations, but he's really into Ivy. So if she, like, is willing to... Like even in this episode, when she's embarrassed to be seen with him in public, And he gets upset about that for a moment. When she goes to his home to apologize, the second she says, hey, I just wanted to apologize, he says, apology accepted. And she says, that wasn't the apology. And he says, oh, okay, then continue. And it's like, oh, he's so willing to just get over this because he doesn't, like, he's this weird mix of really high self-esteem and really low self-esteem in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Where he knows that he's not, like, an all-timer. But he also is happy with how he is, and he is thoughtful. Like he has the roses in the pot.
Right. Yes. Yes.
I want to give the writers kudos on this because I think they came up with the right temporary hookup for Ivy, who like makes sense to be both in a relationship with her and not in a relationship with her for long.
That's true. One thing we can definitely say, I mean, we just said it. Sarah and I, who are a little more ambivalent about the relationship, are like, but it still makes sense. You know, like we still buy this. And best to me, or I'm just realizing now, this is a real big, important thing to me. It doesn't lessen Ivy. You know, they did the work so that we understand what's going on here. And so we understand it. And even if we know she's punching way below her weight, it doesn't lessen her or make her look foolish. You know, like too many shows would absolutely gloss over the why she's with him, and we'd be left going, then who are you? Like, are you even the same character we thought you were?
Yeah, he's not her weakness. He's not like, oh, she's great in all ways, but if only she could see that she's with a schlub. It's no, she knows who she's with, and she's making a choice here, and it does make sense because she's done the cost benefit analysis, and it makes sense for her.
And she's not having to do work. That's kind of a big thing, because it's every single time we see this trope, it's always the wife that cleans up after the husband forever, right? And she's not doing any of that, thank God.
That's true. That's true.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the only cleaning up she has to do is emotional, and it's legitimately a problem she created. She's not doing extra work to make Kite Man feel better about Kite Man. She just wants to go in and say, I treated you badly, and I'm sorry.
Right. She still has a completely different expression when she looks at Harley.
It's
and,
true. Yes.
It would be awkward probably to be the boyfriend of somebody who is like in love with somebody else. After a while, you know, it'll be fine for a while.
Yeah, I like that the only burden that Kite Man puts on Ivy is just the embarrassment of dating Kite Man.
It's true. Yeah. It's not nothing, but it's a lot less than what Harley's putting on her at this point.
It's just situational. He doesn't demand anything.
Totally.
That's excellent. Okay. Wow. All right. I mean, I'm still frustrated that we're not just doing Harley and Ivy, but again, we've been promised, and I have some belief that it'll actually come together. So all of this is still working as a patchwork.
Right.
It's coming together.
By the way, materially, this episode might be the darkest just because an entire family gets massacred in order to heist a machine that just self-destructs later.
That's true.
Like,
wow.
It's as close to, like just from an objective standpoint, like stepping aside from the actual character arcs, where there will be darker episodes in, like, on a personal level. But here, they do massacre an entire family for nothing. And that's really funny. I guess it's like, comedy is tragedy that happens to other people. And later in the season, there will be episodes that feel really, like, unpleasant to watch just because the people we care about go through tough times. But it's just really funny to see a family get massacred for nothing. I don't know what that says about me.
It says that you're watching the right show because, yeah, I'm with you. The wild, over-the-top massacre is not funny in the moment at all.
Not at all.
Like, even our main characters are horrified. Well, except for a couple of gags like Clayface.
It's funny. I won't be needing these anymore. Rips out his eyes.
Right, that's funny. Yeah,
and also true. The Three Little Pigs. Like, it's funny. It's played for laughs. It's still clear that it's awful, but it's played for laughs. I just have to say, kind of as a sidebar, that for a show that is as well animated as this one, that has as much movement and well-constructed frames and gorgeous landscapes and whatnot as this one, it is really funny that they use stock blood effects that, like, every film school student owns. Like, I own these.
I don't know what that says about it. I don't know what that means, but it does feel like it means something.
It means that in post somebody said more blood and they dropped it on.
Did it in a rush. Let's just get it done.
Yeah, and it's throughout the season. It's something that I keep saying. It's like, oh, okay, we're just going into video co-pilot effects right here. Sure, okay, enjoy.
So there's a lot of really good gags throughout that episode, but I mean, I think that was my big stuff, was like Queen of Fables. What does it mean I'm a bad guy, not a bad person in the larger world, and then the Kite Man and Ivy things? Am I skipping anything in that episode that you guys felt really strongly about that needs to be discussed?
The mouse.
Yes, the mouse. What a response. Avishai, how do you feel about the mouse?
He gets Resident Evil'd by the lasers. I have nothing more to add.
I gotta say, King Shark's response to the death of Mouse was also delightful.
He was.
I mean, it was going to be one way or the other. I have never seen a mouse. It was the last couple words of it that did it. I have never seen a mouse smoke human-sized cigarettes to that degree, which means he's seen it before, but in a more controlled situation. And I was like, I just want to know more about King Shark's life. Just tell me about your life.
He's a mercenary loyal to the almighty dollar. They do a lot of characterization work for this character who has no lines.
All right, Sarah, anything else that I'm skipping that you felt really strongly about in the Queen of Fables episode?
No, I think that covers it.
I mean, it was incomplete until we got that last bit of mouse. I agree, but...
Clayface wants a reboot of Fuller House called Fullest House. Okay, we're done.
Okay, that's the thing. Okay, listen, that's why I said it the way I said it. Because if we just wanted to do the podcast where the three of us repeat jokes and giggle, we could do that because the jokes are that good, you know?
They are.
But yeah, that's why I did not want to fall into that myself unless you guys were down. That's why I was
I have fallen into that myself.
So I feel a little similarly, actually, about the Harley nominated to the Legion episode. There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on character-wise, and there are a lot of really good gags. But it also seems kind of on the label. You know what I mean? Like this is what we expected to happen. The Lex is doing exactly the thing. When Ivy stayed behind to talk to Lex the first time I was watching it, I already knew what the plan was, you know? And not in a bad way, not in a this is so hackneyed and obvious way, just like, well, of course it's a bargaining chip. This is Lex Luthor we're talking about. You know, that kind of, everybody does what I expect them to do. And I didn't necessarily see a lot of deeper stuff going on in the nomination episode. What about you guys?
I saw some deeper stuff in there, I thought.
Okay, tell me about it.
So, you know, Luthor as the kind of awful boss who claims to be super diverse, and we have one woman on staff, and claims to completely be your best friend when he wants you aboard, but just, you know, is using you as a bargaining chip. Like, that's all there. What I was interested in this episode was what I think the show is more interested in, which is how does this affect Harley's relationships? Because it's always been her big flaw that she uses her friends to get what she wants. How does she treat her friends when she gets what she wants? And this is sort of the beginning of that kind of a downslide. It's the very beginning of it, because basically the first thing that happens here that's unpleasant is Ivy tries to protect her from the reality that Lex Luthor doesn't really want her. He wants Ivy, but that sort of results in a big falling out because it really is all Harley cares about. She cares about that more than she cares about her friendship right now, and
yes,
and she's sort of willing to kind of burn bridges at the moment because she just wants everybody to agree that she got what she deserved, which is what she's always wanted. So like that is what I found interesting, that sort of trying to prove herself not just to the Legion of Doom, but also to her friends who do believe in her, but she doesn't really think they believe in her if they criticize her or kind of try to lower her expectations. Like, that's interesting to me, and everything else is framework for that.
Yeah, I want to say I agree with all of that. It's not that I thought nothing was going on. It's that all of that scene, and again, this is not shade on the show. All of that seems very appropriate. You know, like all of that makes sense to me. It feels like it's on the tin because of the work that they have done up till now. So I didn't mean to sound like I found this episode, boring or not good enough. It's just like, nope, this is what I expected once we got to this point.
They could have fumbled it. Like they could have.
That's
true. They could have had this episode just be about her success, and then later down the line show the disintegration of her relationships. They could have circumvented that altogether and just kept her and her crew as this funny group who have these adventures now through the Legion of Doom. The fact that they combined her biggest success of being nominated, or being accepted in, with the moment she has her big rift with Ivy. I think says a lot about them, because we can take that for granted, but that is well constructed.
Well, I can't argue with that either. I think I am tired of having the plot versus character conversation, because what I try and do in my own work and what I would like to see is when they happen together, and you're right, that's happening here, and it doesn't always happen that way.
Plot comes from character.
Plot should, yes, it absolutely, and there you are. A maxim that is somehow still mysterious far too often. Sarah, what about yourself? How did you feel about the Legion of Doom Nom episode?
Yeah, that's super interesting stuff, right? Because even whenever Harley does win, it's kind of trying to pit them against each other kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. I thought that was all really interesting. I think that that's something that happens to people a lot. I know I've definitely been in a similar situation as Ivy, I guess, in this, where you're kind of trying to tell your friend that they don't need that validation. But then also I think too that Ivy is getting really tired here of always having to give that validation and
Sure.
not really getting any back. So I think that was really interesting. They were more interesting kind of for how I guess Ivy interacted with them to me, but I thought it was a good Lex Luthor, right?
Giancarlo Esposito.
Right. Yeah, great
all of
casting. Yeah, great writing for Lex. I'll say this, because we kind of digressed in the last episode for both Superman and Batman and Damian, and that we're able to do that in this show because it cares about secondary characters. It cares about writing them well, and that's also rarer than it ought to be, right?
Yeah.
I love their version of Aquaman, and I love that he isn't just another version of Batman. I love that all of the superheroes are not just more Batman. They're not all super dour, emotionless, killjoys. Right. Batman is Batman. Superman is, kind of aw shucks, completely egoless. And then you have Aquaman, who's just kind of a douche. And I appreciate that across the board, they're still kind of playing it straight. Here, Aquaman's a little bit of a joke, but he's not making jokes. He's this is just his characterization on the show, and it feels consistent with how you could expect Aquaman to be played, even in a more serious bit of entertainment.
I mean, that's what we kind of said about Superman also. Yeah. So I think that, and Lois, so it just makes sense. And as far as Aquaman not himself being the joke, I think it's really interesting and clever and deeper, honestly, that they took the thing that everybody else sees as the obvious joke. He talks to fish. And they turned it into a weakness that Harley could exploit. And also, I mean, it's funny in the moment, but if you think very hard about what it was like for Aquaman in that room after the aquarium broke, it's also horrifying,
It's not too far off from if Harley got into a fight with Ivy and killed all our plants,
Yeah. They have names.
Yeah.
That was one of the best lines.
It was. I agree with you, because it was so tossed off and on the way out and not the point, and just I had to pause almost every time I watch that episode. I have to pause because I'm laughing at they have names, because you're right. We do know they have names. We should have guessed.
Any one of us can say that.
I appreciated that in the middle of this battle, which has nothing to do with Black Manta steps in and makes it all about himself. It's
that was so funny. That is 100% that character.
This isn't about you.
Every time he pops up, oh no,
well, this
is about me.
This isn't not about me. and in that moment, when Black Manta gets tossed into Ivy and Ivy gets bonked on the head and almost passes out, Harley goes into a fugue state for a moment. She just starts wailing on Aquaman after that, and I thought that was a nice little grace note.
It reminded me a lot of Ivy bursting into the TV studio. Get your hands off her kind of a moment.
They love each other.
They love each other. Yes, we saw at least a glimmer of the reciprocation there, in Harley.
And Harley has a very specific insecurity about their relationship, which she puts into words in this episode, which is, she believes, or at least she says, that she thinks that Ivy only cared about her when she needed her, when Harley needed her, and she's upset that Harley no longer needs her. Like, that's how Harley sees it in that moment, but that says a lot about how Harley kind of sees their relationship, and it's something that seems really real. Like, I've known people like that. I've seen, it's incredibly relatable, and something that Dr. Harleen Quinzel would dissect for a while.
And also from Poison Ivy's side, it's really interesting because she's kind of afraid that it's true. And so that back and forth was so good, I thought.
Yeah, it struck me as both of them saying things that they were meant to be hurtful, but they were also meant to be true. They weren't just throwing muck at the wall for a fight. They were saying some stuff that they at least perceived to be reality, and that they weren't okay with. And it's like, if this conversation were turned down 5 notches, it would be like the healthiest friend or lover conversation.
Yes, they do not turn things down very much.
Right.
Right. I don't want them to, because that's boring to watch. But I was just thinking, if this were a reasonable conversation instead of an argument, it would be amazing.
Right.
And if it weren't for the storming out and some of the other things that keep them from coming back together quickly, I could even see that being the gateway to a better, more robust conversation. But we're not going to have that problem until the next episode. Which I don't want to jump to yet, because I want you guys' opinion about something. The subplot that I am referring to as Psycho, I hate it, and it's stupid, and I don't want it on my screen when I could be watching funny stuff at the Legion of Doom. How did you guys feel about that subplot?
So I just kind of, like, at least here, like, Sai isn't being the worst in this episode from a Jewish perspective, and Psycho is just, like, he could be just about any other character in this episode. I feel like they needed a subplot, and so they came up with this, but I don't know what it adds. I don't know what, it's always fun to see a giant monster, I suppose. And at least they did kind of do a little bit of a thematic tie-in at the end where, Muriel, the squid person, says that, or the reason she's upset about Sai was because he was her best friend and he abandoned her. And Harley has that look on her face that she gets whenever she realizes that the theme of the subplot and the theme of the plot are the same.
Right.
And
oh no, I've been after school specialed.
Yeah, I mean, these are good writers, and they know how to bring it home. I just found it kind of unremarkable. It didn't, like, upset me or anything. I just didn't really see the point.
I hate it because of that. That's why, because so much other stuff in this show has a point and matters and is remarkable, that the fact that this one is so, pardon the pun, dead fish is what bothered me.
It felt like a placeholder.
Sarah, am I overreacting?
What a loaded question.
My ego can take it.
No, I don't think anybody's overreacting. I thought it was kind of pointless. They used it a little bit thematically, right? So there was that, but overall pretty pointless. I enjoyed the fact that it showed him as a dashing young man who was doing all kinds of good work and stuff, even though it turned out like it did. I appreciated that there was a recognition that at one point this guy was, like, ambitious and, not necessarily representative of all of the problems that we saw and talked about, like, for the last few episodes.
Yeah.
But
That he was good at his job and proud of it is okay. So we got a little more nuance, a little more of a look into Sai. I don't know that I wanted or needed it, but actually Sai probably does need a more nuanced look, because it hasn't been great up till now. Yeah.
Yeah. But I also do kind of feel for the writer's room a little bit, because I know that they probably needed a B plot and couldn't find something else that worked for this particular story, and maybe they had other subplot ideas that they wanted to save for other episodes. And so they settled. They probably had a like temporary idea that they would replace if they had something better. But, you know, in production, the trains left the station before you even start. So they had to do what they had to do. And they filled it. They filled the hole. It could have been a lot worse.
Yes.
And we're all writers here. Like the three of us are writers in one form or another. We have all written fictional things, and we have all had exactly that thing happen where it was like, I know that there's a better idea for me here. I can't figure out what it is, and this one's good enough. You know, it's not like I hacked together my A plot. I hacked together my B plot. You know, yeah. I'm comfortable. Let's send it out. We've all been there, I suspect. Let me rephrase. I have been there, and my ego hopes that you two have both been there also.
Well, it's especially true in TV production because it's not useful to be the voice in the room saying this is a bad idea. It's only useful to be the voice in the room who says I have a better one. So somebody came up with this idea. Yes. It was on the board. Nobody came up with something better in time, so they did it.
Moving on with the theme, what seems to be my theme of this podcast episode is that I also really enjoyed the episode where Harley falls back in with Joker. But, and don't get me wrong, kind of like the last one, there's a lot going on here, but it's also the stuff that I would expect to be going on here. You know what I mean?
I was really into this episode personally because, yeah, it is the stuff that makes sense for the show to do. But I appreciated that the show did it in this way because I think that one of the things that the show is particularly good at writing is the sort of the aftermath of a manipulative relationship. I think that showing how even though she broke up with him and has made such a conscious effort to pull away from him and has had the support system to sort of try to create her own new identity, because she's put so much stock into trying to impress the Joker by getting back into the Legion of Doom, to show him that she doesn't need him anymore, she hasn't overcome her flaw. And I think it was about time for this show to get into that, really kind of remind us that she's not out of the woods yet. She still has more stuff to address, but also B, how this affects her support group. And it's pretty realistic, like the people in her group at the end of this episode, when they think that she has gotten back together with the Joker, they all turn their backs on her. And it's a really complex situation because on one hand, you need friends who are able to be there for you when you backslide. On the other hand, there's only so much, toxicity that your friends can take. And it's interesting to see how that works here and what the fallout will be in the coming weeks, because Harley, in this case, did backslide for reasons that aren't really her fault. And her friends, moved away from her for reasons that make sense, but are also not necessarily the healthiest for everyone involved. But it makes complete sense for them to have done it. It makes complete sense for at the end when Harley tells Ivy that she's ready to help her on her mission, and Ivy says she just wants to go solo. Being the friend who has been hurt being the friend who tries to pull you off the ledge too many times and getting hurt in the process does take its toll, and it can become difficult to decide when you stop being that friend. And I thought this did it well, and I thought that they kept things in Harley's perspective, on her side of things pretty well. I understood why she was making the choices she was making. I thought that the Joker, with his dumb Richard Spencer haircut, was doing a solid job of being a completely manipulative but very self-aware manipulative person. He knew exactly what he was doing. He's not Dr. Psycho, as we've talked about. He's not compulsive. He's completely calculating, and it works and it makes sense, and I thought this felt authentic.
With the Joker, this establishes how completely insidious he is.
Yeah.
I think because we know a lot about their relationship being really bad, and we talked about Harley taking this level of responsibility in their relationship a couple of episodes ago. But this just shows that he will always find the thing that is weakest in every person around him, and he'll attack it. And that is deeply upsetting. So even whenever he's smiling at you, he seems to be noticing you. He knows that that's something that he's weaponizing against you.
Yeah.
And so seeing that actually play out was important, I think, to show the level of stuff he did, you know, to Harley and their relationship, because he's so manipulative. It's ridiculous. He's shockingly manipulative in this episode. It's her weakest moment, you know. She is afraid that Ivy doesn't take her seriously, and she's afraid of a lot of things, and so this is how that manifests.
And like you said, Joshua, like, of course it makes sense for this show to be doing this, and it feels completely appropriate for the show. I see a number of ways they could have fumbled it. I think that they could have dropped the ball on this.
Oh, definitely.
They could have gone the route that I think, you know, Harley was expecting, which was sort of a workplace rivalry where she's in the Legion of Doom and the Joker is trying to undermine her in a very overt way. I think that there's a version of the show that does that, where it's just the bickering of exes who are, you know, bitter over each other. And I think that it's impressive that instead they went the psychological warfare route, where it is the Joker trying to, you know, hurt her by making her feel like she had accomplished something and making her feel like she was respected. And then at the moment where she feels most, happiest, he just completely tears her down and leaves her in a lower spot than before. I think that that's something that the show could have completely screwed up. And throughout the episode, they keep reminding us that she expects the overt warfare. She expects argument in the workplace. And she is suspicious of his attempts to manipulate her at first. And I think that's really important because it shows that it's not just that she has a blind spot. He knows how to manipulate her even if she's consciously aware that I think that this is wrong. I think that was really important. And I have to imagine that the writer's room spent a lot of time discussing this in detail.
I was just going to agree. I think that that's absolutely true. It was something that we've seen go so badly so many times, right? In so many stories.
I think I want to say now, as the kind of host and moderator, what my issue, I am not denigrating these episodes, but I do a few like recap and commentary podcasts. And this one usually is about the more typical DC animated universe, you know, and we started with Batman the Animated Series, and we didn't do every episode because I knew that there was a trap, and it's the trap that I'm kind of falling into here, where it's like, if they're just going to do rock solid quality every week, you know, then that is, I appreciate it. Like, I appreciate the rock solid quality, but it's also like when it's that good that often, there's a little less to unpack, you know, there's a little less to like zero in on. Things that are amazing, easy to talk about. Things that are utter garbage, easy to talk about. Things that just show up and do the damn work every time is like, well, it's another great episode. What am I supposed to say? You know?
We said a lot, though. I think that...
To the contrary, we've been gabbing.
Sara with the realism, just coming in with the truth.
We talked for an hour so far. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that you're right, though, because that is very true. You start to be kind of... I mean, that happens to me on on Comics all of the time because we say a lot of positive things. And after a while, you're just like, it's great. I don't know what else to tell you. This was really great, specifically because I think of how they addressed Joker in it, because he is an absolute monster. And I think that we saw him be a monster in different ways, but we didn't really see this way yet. So I think that that was something that, you know, surprised all of us a little bit.
Yeah, I also appreciated that Harley's the one voice in the Legion of Doom who's willing to sort of speak up against the Joker's bad ideas. Where everybody at that table is completely willing to hand him over $600 million to build this tower. And the second she raises her voice and says, I don't get it, that doesn't make sense, that's when Luthor jumps in and basically says, yeah, that doesn't make sense, we're not doing that. But everybody is afraid of upsetting him. And you could say that that's because he's a maniac who can blow them up. But it's also because of this insidiousness. He's able to Like there are people like that in all sorts of boardrooms. The people who are you don't want to stand up to them because you don't want to face the consequences socially. And I appreciated that they made him that guy as well. That he's not just this agent of chaos. He is actually a bully.
And I also loved how Ivy is kind of getting tired of it too. I think that the characterization in all of these were really good. I like the way that Ivy is just always against Joker.
Yeah.
She's like the only person who never is manipulated. That happens in the comics too, where he just can't manipulate her because she just hates him so much. And that's great. It's great to see. There has to be someone who isn't manipulated by that guy. But you can see how in the end, he's still trying to get between that relationship. Like he's still trying to separate Harley from her people. And the reason, that he hates her so much is like Ivy hates him because he has a bad effect. And then he hates her just because she is Harley's way out, kind of.
Yeah. And that's also very true to life.
We saw that in a much earlier episode when right in the middle of Ivy looking out for Harley, he just goes under his breath, ugh, female friendships. Like we've seen it from jump. We just didn't see it in action. We just saw it in word rather than deed. So you're right. This is all really important stuff, especially for going into the ending. No spoilers, mostly for Sarah.
Yeah. Entirely for Sarah. There's an interesting thing about Ivy in this episode also where you get sort of a bigger sense of what her own personal fears are. She's afraid of abandonment, essentially. And so she puts up walls, and she's so clear-eyed about everything and everyone except for Harley, where she... In this episode, like, while Harley is giving her excuses of, I just got roped into a Legion of Doom thing, Ivy's standing up for her to Frank. Frank is saying, listen, like, I think she's changed.
That's true.
And Ivy's the one saying... Oh no, I don't think that's the case. Ivy doesn't want it to be true that Harley is potentially going to abandon her, because that's Ivy's biggest fear. And seeing that play out on her face in this episode, where she's being told this, but she doesn't want to believe it, but you see that doubt creeping in, I think that speaks volumes about where she is as a character, where she is in that relationship.
Yeah, and how much she prioritizes Harley. And so it's scary that person would not reciprocate, and then also definitely is doing the exact opposite. I do want to note, I remembered a mistake that the writers made, and it is that Poison Ivy gets poisoned at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
She can't do that. She's Poison Ivy.
I'm assuming that that's because it involves herbicides, right? Because they kill her little plant. So I'm assuming that they just, Scarecrow knows his business. He mixed in some super DDT that would lower her defenses enough. That's my backfill, because I had the same thought.
I'm like not buying.
I'm gonna look for it in the next episode when I do my rewatch, because if I recall correctly, I think they explain it. But it's been a while, so I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, but sort of to the point of Ivy on that mission alone. On rewatch, I was paying more close attention to this. Harley's available for her in that moment, right? She says, like, I'm sorry that I almost blew you off, but I'm ready to help you now. And Ivy turns her down. And that speaks to the both of them, because if Ivy is afraid of abandonment, and she's afraid that her friend is abandoning her, it's easier for her to be the one to say, do not come, than to show up and be stood up.
Yes.
Yeah, that's not necessarily like a thing that she did because it makes intellectual sense. It's a thing that she needed to do emotionally. She needed to be the one to say no so that she can't be disappointed. And that's interesting stuff, and I want to see how they continue to work with that with her character. Yeah,
they do that dynamic a lot in the comics too, that they're kind of insecurities playing off of each other and stuff, and it's always so interesting.
Worth mentioning. Of course, this puts a strain on Harley's relationship with Ivy. They do the work in this episode to also show the strain it puts on her other friends, right? Her crew.
That's true.
She no longer really needs them, right, to get what she wants, and so she has left them in the goon pool to blow up juiceries with Bane, and like it's a lot smaller than the kind of betrayal that Ivy sees from Harley, but it's worth noting because that's entirely on track with the character. It's, you guys served a purpose for me. Once you stop serving a purpose for me, are we still friends? I don't know. That's kind of up to me. And she essentially kind of forgets about them, right? She does do the work at the beginning when she goes to the Joker. Like, the reason she goes out on the date with the Joker is to to make their case. But then she forgets about all that, and they see that. And I think that's interesting because they're staying on her arc. It's not to get too much into the movie again, I really enjoyed the Birds of Prey movie. I thought they kind of fumbled her arc there because they were heading somewhere and then just kind of swerved away. One thing this show does particularly well is staying on arc with Harley.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
I wanted to point out, again, as the resident Oklahoman, that we get Tulsa name dropped, which I am now going to go find out which person or persons in the writer's room are from Oklahoma, because I just don't believe that we're getting this many Oklahoma references. I'm from here and I try not to reference Oklahoma, right? Like, it's shocking, just weird. So I'm going to go, I've got a little detective work to do. And I just wanted to point that out because it's very, look, I notice every time any show mentions Oklahoma because it just doesn't happen very often,
Yeah.
No, not very often.
Well, unless it's the entirety of HBO's Watchmen.
Yep.
Okay,
yep, that's
now,
a different tone.
But although
I'm not going to say that I forgot Watchmen existed, but let me tell you that as surprised as I was at how Watchmen started, I was doubly surprised at the fact that they camped in Oklahoma the entire series. I'm also going to say that there are 2 or 3 times in there that it's clear that no one in the writer's room actually looked at a map of Oklahoma. So I'm going to say Harley's doing a better job.
Great. Although, like, by bringing up Tulsa, that made me look back at my notes about Esteban, and I appreciate what they're doing with Luther as this bizarrely, like, culturally insensitive boss who is like, he touts that they have one woman, I forgot her name, but she's lovely, and now he has, like, his, like, sort of like, here is our minority in the office, and it's some white guy named Steve from Tulsa. And, like,
right.
It's an interesting thing to play with Luther, and also just with this version of Luther, who's played by Giancarlo Esposito, and they made him non-white. It's interesting. It's interesting, and I don't think it's inauthentic.
That's a beautiful place to end it. Yeah.
Let's end it on Lex Luthor's cultural insensitivity.
Well, no, it seems right. It seems right.
When they hired Bane, it was because there was a lot of politics involved there. Apparently.
It's funny you mention his comments on the politics around Bane, because Bane is South American.
Yeah, and he's often whitewashed in the movies.
And he's often whitewashed, and here we have a non-white Lex Luthor making the point that Bane got in based on politics, and they never say racial politics, but they don't not say racial politics, and suddenly I'm Black Manta. But
nothing racist. Yeah. Well, okay, so, I'm the Jew on this podcast who talks about the things that strike me as insensitive to Jews. I would be curious to hear opinions of people from other various groups, because this show makes jokes, like, throughout, and nothing strikes me as particularly off, but there could be a lot that I'm missing here,
Absolutely, yeah.
There's almost always something that I feel like I'm missing, so definitely going to agree that that's always good. But what's fun about it is that we won't be the last people who talk about it.
Like, they make a joke about when King Shark's fin gets blown off. They make a joke about, like, a Japanese businessman wants to buy it or something like that.
Oh,
yeah,
God.
Yeah.
Like, God. It's their stuff, and I'd be curious to know what sort of the ratio is of inoffensive to offensive.
I feel like I feel like I hear them and then I'm like, oh, that's offensive, and then I just completely forget about them, which is why people should not take movie recommendations from me pretty much ever, because I'll be like, oh yeah, I loved that movie, but I, like, forget the, like, 20-minute scenes of, like, terribleness that are happening in it. I'm just like, oh yeah, that did happen. Oh yeah, I guess that was really offensive. Damn.
You know what's great? Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Your screen for problematic content is too strong because even you forget it. You don't pass it on to others.
Yeah, it happens. I'm just like, zip, I didn't want to see that. But then, of course, if I have to watch something for criticism, then of course, you have to look at it a little bit more closely.
One thing I do find interesting about Luther in this show is that he's played by Giancarlo Esposito, and so they gave him a darker skin tone. They don't do that with every character played by a non-white actor. And it's interesting that they chose to do it here. Maybe it's because they realized he'd be recognizable. But it was definitely an active choice on their part. So that is interesting to me.
Yeah, his role in this. Oh, Lex.
It is simultaneously not big enough for Lex Luthor and also perfectly Lex Luthor,
Kind of exactly who he is. Yeah.
Yes.
Because he's always thinking about, are we going to get in trouble for this? Not, is this wrong?
Yeah. Okay, so we were talking about Superman before, and how do you challenge a character who's completely secure in himself and has, it generally is upbeat about things because nothing can hurt him, and he knows that he's morally in the right and all that. And the answer is this Lex Luthor, right? Like, who is capable of sort of maneuvering within rules.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, not to make this the podcast about Superman again, but I think that the writers on this have a generally pretty solid sense about their A-list heroes and villains, about what makes them work, what makes them not work. Like, Joker and Batman.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
If they wanted to do a spin-off, I don't think it'd be great because I do love that this is a Harley Quinn show. But if they wanted to do a spin-off about this Joker versus this Batman and play it essentially straight, it works. Like, they work as foils against each other, and same with this version of Luthor and this version of Superman.
I also like how all of a sudden now I can use this version of Lex as the explanation for how the Legion of Doom has a headquarters right out in the middle of everything. He just followed the rules. I just filled out the forms. No one thought that a supervillain would fill out the forms. Lex filled out the forms, and now look at our palatial estate.
Lex almost certainly hired somebody to fill out those forms.
Well, that's fair. But Lex did the research to know that there were forms, and then he made Esteban do it.
Although...
Oh, Lex, he's hilarious in this.
Apparently he can't hire somebody to make an HD introductory video. It has to be on VHS, made in the 80s, I guess.
Who can afford that kind of thing when you're just passing out $600 million to Joker on the reg?
But I also just appreciate that they have an expense account that they could charge any meal that they if Harley is at a dinner and she discusses doing something evil, she can charge it to the expense account. Like, that works.
It's right. It's right. I had a friend of mine point out to me that if it were 2005 and this show were out, that we would be swimming in web shorts, that were just wacky stuff around the Legion of Doom or around the Batcave or whatever. And I have to tell you, I kind of wouldn't hate that, I don't want whole spin-offs, but I wouldn't hate 3 to 5 minute jokey shows that were just about these periphery things that we find fascinating, right? They're interesting and they make a lot of sense. I'd like to see more of that without it eclipsing what the show is actually about.
It's a little Robot Chicken, isn't it?
It is. That about wraps it up for this animated discussion. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, come find us on Twitter. Sara is at Sara Century, Avishai is at Avishai W, and I am at Joshua Unruh. And the hashtag is animated discussion. Sara, where else can people find you?
I have a website, so people can find me at www.saracentury.com. Also, I've been doing some scripts for Behind the Panel through Sci-Fi, which is basically just talking, about comics. And doing a couple of short stories. So I would recommend just checking out the website because there's going to be tons of projects listed. Oh, and Bitches on Comics, of course.
Oh yeah, all fine offerings. I appreciate all of them. Excellent stuff. And Avishai, what about yourself?
Like you said, you can find me on Twitter at AvishaiW.
Remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. Show your support by pledging at Patreon or by leaving a great review on Apple Podcasts to make it easier for more people to find us and join in the discussion. The links to Patreon, Apple Podcasts, and Twitter are easy to find in the show notes. Thanks so much for joining us for this animated discussion. So until next time, I am the Superman from Kryptolon.